We don't have children. We didn't have, an extensive social life, mainly because of the pressures of my job. We very rarely went on holiday. So we had incomes that would, as far as I was working round the clock most days, I wasn't at home very often. I didn't take much, if anything, to do with the administration of our household. I mean, just to explain how our finances work, we had separate bank accounts. I never had any access to his bank account. He didn't have any to mine. Every month,
thousands of pounds on pens, some of which you were pictured using. Expensive handbags as gifts for you. Thousands of pounds on several coffee machines.
Well,
these were a whole series of items that were far out of reach of the normal family.
We weren't a normal family. I was the First Minister of the country. Expensive watches. I never saw those watches. Afforded a decent coffee machine.
And a lot of people might think, OK, it's not that unusual in a relationship that one person does the bills, one person looks after the money, and absolutely, you were very busy. But he bought a Jaguar car worth more than £80,000. That sat in your driveway. But did you never have a conversation about where you got the money for?
I didn't drive. I had no interest in cars. He bought a Jaguar. He wanted to change to an electric car. He told me that the range on the Jaguar was one that he thought was good. And I know a Jaguar is an expensive car, but we were on high salaries. If he had been, I don't want to be flippant about this, but if he'd been, bringing Tiffany diamonds into the house or something pounds. Now, I genuinely don't know whether that is the pepper grinder that I was using in my house, but I also am genuinely not sure how I was meant to know it cost that amount of money. Somebody I loved, by somebody I trusted and had never been given any reason until the last 3 years to think that I couldn't trust. And
are you angry with him?
I even think that begins to cover it.
People were asking questions of you and the party, pushing for more transparency about how money was being spent, and they didn't get it.
I don't.
Do you wish you'd done it differently?
No, I don't accept that's true. Nobody, and this is where it has been made to sound like something it's not. This was not concerns about embezzlement of funds. This was concerns about we'd raise money for an independence referendum, and was it being used for election campaigning?
When did you begin to suspect that there had been wrongdoing?
Early in 2023, around about the spring, I think, of 2023, it became clear that some people who were being interviewed by the police were being asked not just about this issue of, referendum funding used for election campaigns, but there were questions being asked about the purchase of individual items. I asked him why on earth he'd bought a camper van, and the explanation I got then was that he'd bought it in advance of the 2021 election because we still were under COVID restrictions, and he didn't know the extent of the COVID restrictions that would still be in place during the campaign. He'd thought a camper van, would help get key communicators around the country if we went. He told me sometime last week, the week before Monday, that he was going to plead guilty. Really, I've not been at home. I haven't seen him I haven't seen him from the point he told me he was going to plead guilty until he pled guilty on Monday, because I wasn't able to, just emotionally wasn't able to deal with that.
In the time you were in charge, you didn't ask more questions about what was going on.
I am deeply sorry this has happened. But Peter went to, as we now know, great lengths to cover his tracks. For my own sake, but for the sake of people out there, a lot of women who end up finding themselves blamed for the actions of the men in their lives.
For one of the biggest political scandals that took place on your watch as leader of that party. That's a different thing to saying you're responsible for his crimes.
No, but it's not, because he perpetrated a crime on the SNP. By definition, that included me as the party leader. He misled, he deceived. He's serving and will be serving a sentence for...
One of the things there's been a lot of discussion of this week was your decision to say no comment. Well, it's going to be very interesting to see what happens next in this saga, and I suspect other politicians are still going to have questions for her. But Asma, watching that interview, what stood out to you?
I don't really know where to start with that, because It's like parallel lines, because you have a political story, and we know how, and quite rightly, people in this country post the expenses saga feel about politicians and money. And we understand that that's the political story, the lack of curiosity. But also running beside that, I'm afraid, is a very personal story about a marriage and how it was working or not working. Now, I know there's almost no space for that in politics, but, you know, we are human beings. And I found a lot of what she was saying about the way that her household was run and the way that she had an incredibly busy job, I found that actually very convincing. The problem is that when you are, and you made this point, when you are the leader of a political party, when you are the leader of a country, and you have many, many enemies, as Nicola Sturgeon did and still does, you have to be across that detail. And I understand she was busy. She's explained all the individual purchases. She's explained about people raising concerns and saying, but they weren't raising concerns about embezzlement, they were raising concerns about funds. So I do believe actually what she's saying needed to have been more across the detail. And
not really, but the thing that made me angry in that interview was the way that she said the SNP was the victim. I think the real victim here is confidence in democracy, because people voted for the SNP in election after election, and now the chief executive of that party has been unmasked as a criminal. And, you know, I can disagree with Nicola Sturgeon's views on independence or her policies that saw Scotland grow more slowly than England while she was First Minister, but this is far, far more damaging.
The interesting thing, though, Rosanna, is that actually the SNP did just win, I think it was the 5th victory in a row, even party despite this.
I think that watching your interview, people will change their mind quite significantly. But I think whatever Nicola Sturgeon knew or didn't know, the whole saga has hugely undermined confidence in politicians. And it does make it very difficult not to play the world's smallest violin for someone who hasn't noticed a Jaguar in the driveway or thought, Pete, we've got a new robotic lawnmower. Where's that come from? And I think the really important point here, and one which you sort of allude to, Laura, is the fact that the major political parties would be front page news. If it was a Labour politician, even a Conservative politician, they would be dragged backwards through a bush and hounded out of politics. Yet when it is the SNP, when we do have things like Nigel Farage and his £5 million donation that doesn't go answered, things like that, it feels like all politicians should be held to the same level of account. It must be equal, and currently it isn't.
And just briefly, why did you think people would change their minds seeing that interview?
Because I think people expect the leader of a nation, particularly when, as you flagged in that interview, she was alerted to the fact that there were some financial challenges. You can't be that smart and be that level of leader without having your eyes on the detail. And I know and I respect the point that people's marriages and personal lives are very difficult, but you have to have an exorbitant amount of richness in your family not to notice £2,000 salt and pepper grinders that, quite frankly, should be going and retrieving the salt themselves and grinding it themselves for that amount of money.
Asma, what do you think the consequences of this are likely to be?
The consequence of what's happening to Nicola Sturgeon, well, I mean, she's been cleared. So she feels she doesn't have a stain on her character. The problem is, of course, is that only 20% of people believe her. She will rebuild her life. The question you were asking about assets is a difficult one, in that there was some stuff about saying that she might, lose her marital home. I don't think that the SNP is going to be affected by this at all.
Well, we will see. Politics is always fascinating, human as well as professional.